At some point, consistency stops being something that you choose and it starts being something that you have to be. At some point, all of our established ties to our identity that we make with regards to what we eat, what we do, who we hang out with, it stops being so much of a choice and more of a non negotiable. Before I dive into this episode, I want to give kudos and a shout out to a long list of people who have inspired me to take the time to sit down and record this solo episode today. Firstly, shout out to Joan, who listens to all the episodes. But then secondly, I want to give an honorable mention to Jay Croft, the host of Optimal Aging Podcast, who I'm honored to help with production. And there's been numerous times where I feel like he is kind of tapped out, and I give him a little bit of a nudge to record a solo episode, and he just crushes it. So if you haven't yet, check out the Optimal Aging Podcast. It's well worth listening to, and honestly, even if you're in your 30s, there's a likelihood that a lot of the subject matter either applies to your business if you're a fellow coach, or perhaps it applies to something that your parents may be experiencing or older siblings, wherever you're at in life and whatever your kind of familial and social environments are. I think that's worthwhile. And a couple more shout outs. Going to give a shout out to Tyler Argento, who I also help her publish her podcast. And Tyler's podcast is called The Cool Down with Tyler Argento. She is 2 episodes into the new format with a new episode coming out probably next week. Well worth supporting, well worth listening to. She's another person who's been doing solo episodes where you get to just hear what she's working on, what she's all about, what is challenging her, what gives her the confidence, everything like that. And thirdly, somebody that I want to give kudos to is Andrew Coates. So Andrew Coates and I have been working together on his podcast, the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast, since late last year. Now that I think about it, time really, really flies. And it's cool to see the evolution between our work, him as the host, getting to see him stack up more accolades as far as guests who've been on the show, different brands who trust him with their marketing and whatnot, because he has paid advertisers on his show. If you're ever looking to get into that stuff, my podcast course can get you a really solid start, or you can work with me one-on-one on consulting. But this isn't meant to be a self-promo. This is just me grounding myself with where I'm at with things. Now, I cannot go further without giving a shout out to the one and only Alex McBrarty. When I really think about it, he has been somebody that I've worked alongside for quite some time now. We started with one-on-one Zoom calls just to encourage each other, to see where we could support each other with our strengths and sort of reveal our weaknesses, but then just work on them. And since about 2021, I've formally worked with him as a contractor, coaching with his team, and then helping with some of the behind-the-scenes business stuff. So these are the people that I just wanted to recognize. They're people who support my career, and they're just people who hold me to a higher standard. And if it weren't for these people, I wouldn't have made it such a priority to stop what I'm doing and record an episode tonight. Right now, I'm recording on Wednesday, October 8th at about 10 p.m., and this is how a lot of my days go. Now, sometimes people might misunderstand my discipline, and the part that they never see is this. The part that other people never see is that I am very familiar with my fragility, I guess. So I know that on any given day, everybody that I work with could decide that they would like to stop working with me. And this has happened. As a personal trainer, there's definitely been days where maybe I had 5 clients and all 5 clients canceled their session. It makes it easier when 2 of the clients know each other or when there's bad weather and stuff like that. But This is one of those things that I think about all the time that lights a big fire under my butt. I would love to just stop, take it easy, and play Mario Kart this evening. But there's a lot of things that I hold myself to the standard to follow through with because I've told people that I'm going to do them. But there have been times when I've almost quit being the consistent one. And this can come up in a lot of different layers to life. And I'm going to talk about the one that is most heaviest on my heart today, just because it's top of mind. Life has been doing life things, so I want to talk about my journey with Jiujitsu. It's been something that I have been doing for the last, I think, 2 to 3 years now. And the first year or two were far more consistent than this past one. And for the longest time, I thought that I was just simply getting physical injuries and that I couldn't like sustain the recovery process. But what I've been learning recently through some very gradual medical intervention, basically, I noticed far too many symptoms that correlated with things like perhaps gallbladder or appendicitis or any other complication, very much nutrition related, and all focused on pain and discomfort on my right side, plus excessive bloating. And initially, when all of this stuff came up, I was thinking, okay, I must be slipping with my nutrition. Maybe I'm not being active enough. I'm probably just like, I don't have enough resilience. I don't have enough bounce back. I don't have enough discipline. And what would end up happening is that I just felt so much discomfort that I couldn't go to jujitsu. And if I went to jujitsu, it would be fine and I wouldn't regret it, but my symptoms wouldn't get better. They would be about the same, rarely better, sometimes worse. Sometimes it's just they just kept staying and staying and staying. And even as I talk to you now, it's kind of like there's like lumps or like things in the right side of my abdomen. And I can't diagnose myself. I'm still waiting on results from some of my tests with some ultrasounds scheduled for next week. And it's very vulnerable for me to talk about this because, as my doctor pointed out to me, the last time I'd gone out for any kind of blood work was in 2009, and that was after my cross-country incident because my blood work was all messed up after a severe heat stroke. And so it's been a long time. I went to a doctor 2 years ago with the exact same symptoms, and I talked to him about what I was experiencing, and he chalked it up to that I needed better nutrition, maybe some physiotherapy. And I thought nothing of it. I was like, okay, he's probably right. I can always do better. And that kind of came back to me always pushing myself to do what I needed to do. And so when I stopped being the consistent one was when I went to jiu-jitsu less. I wasn't posting, it's a good day for jiu-jitsu. I wasn't as involved. I wasn't registering for competitions. And it made me feel terrible. But a commitment that I made to myself is I'm going to stay enrolled in jiu-jitsu, like paying the monthly fee, having that accountability, trying to be involved in whatever way I can, and perhaps making appearances once every couple of weeks or once a month or something just to stay in the rotation. Because I don't really know what the future holds, and there's a lot of life things coming up. Like lately in the last few months, like even just my parents have needed support or at least appreciated support. There's lots of scenarios where they could call on somebody else, but it's just in my intuition when they need somebody to drive them into town or to help with things around the house. I'm like, why wouldn't I do this? I have the flexibility to do this. I tend to feel called to do this, so I'm going to show up for them. But when you're giving your time to somebody, it means that you have to be much more conscious about how you're spending the rest of your time. And with my commitments that I have for the podcast that I produce and the in-person clients that I train, the online clients that I train, it's very important to be conscious of the commitments that you set out to make and understanding that you can't be everywhere, but the places that you will be are the places where you can serve the biggest benefit. And in most cases, when we're talking about that, it is a place where you can move the needle the most. So in a lot of instances, I can move the needle the most right now with my coaching and with the work that I do and the support that I can offer. And if I am dealing with like ab soreness, discomfort, bloating, etc., I can't move the needle as far with jujitsu, but I can stay in the pulse of things, and I can kind of stay connected either through obligation or commitment, monetary commitment, I should say. And that's what makes it easier for me to go back. And that is what's going to pull me back, is because one day I will, whether it's through nutritional intervention or whether it's through surgery or some kind of recovery, I'm sure, very certain that I'll get back to doing jujitsu where I can progress. And I've seen this in so many other people's journeys. And the biggest thing is they make it easy to walk away and never come back. And I'm making a point to not make it easy to walk away and never come back. I'm going to make it so that I have to go back, so that they expect me back. Because I think that's one of the most integral things. And it's sort of like a mindset shift, because during this time, I'm paying a membership where that funds could be allocated elsewhere. But I know that by keeping that in the pot of the jiu-jitsu school, not only does it make it so that they can provide the support to other students, other jiu-jitsu practitioners, but also, I mean, it just keeps me thinking about it, keeps it at the top of my mind, keeps me in the ecosystem, that they know that, like, hey, if I'm missing for a while, maybe check in or just notice when I come back. And they are very good about that. That's one thing that they deserve a lot of praise for. Shout out to Pedro and Huthefa and every other coach there that helps out with, even with programs I have nothing to do with. I have a lot of respect for anybody who helps with the kids program. Shout out to Luke Amico. I'm not sure if he ever listens to my podcast, but if he does, shout out. Now, I'm going to talk about another topic here. What scares you more, losing momentum or losing your identity if you stop? And I'm going to draw back to some past experiences in fitness. And I think the one that I'm going to draw from is my experience going to a ton of spin classes, because a lot of that started turning into my identity. And what I found was when I focused my mindset more on the momentum and less on the identity, it made it easier to maintain that momentum. So what I realized is that life comes in seasons, and just like seasons change from fall to winter to spring to summer, and each of those seasons is a little bit different, but all of them have something to offer. All of them are going to bring upon some reason for grit for you. The same is true for everything that we go through in life. A person's ability to be active in the ways that looks is going to be different when they're 20 versus when they're 30 versus when they're 40 versus when they're 50 versus when they're 60, etc., etc., etc. But the momentum is in maintaining something during that period of time. And what ends up happening is when we're tied too closely to our identity, it makes it so much easier to lose that momentum. As an example, a lot of people who are high-level athletes at a younger age, even on an amateur level, so they're like the best in the gym class, but maybe they're not the best on a college level. But it's still something that is tied to their identity. And they're like, back in the day, I was so fast. But then now, they only reflect on that period of time, and they don't think about the present. Reason being is because they found a way to hold on to the identity, but let go of the momentum. Which is why it's helpful to make that shift when you're aware of this happening. So for example, I used to play soccer, but I'm not going to be walking around saying that like I was some great soccer player, because if somebody has me go on a field, there's going to be better soccer players than me. And so what I would rather do is say, you need another player for soccer? I'll play. I used to play, but I still play every chance that I get, because that puts me in a position to start stacking up motivation, or not motivation, I should say momentum. Now, this might motivate somebody like yourself to look at, for example, a lot of social club sports leagues will allow drop ins or substitutes. So if there's an established team, a lot of time they will be missing a player, and you can sign up to be a sub and fill in and help them out. This will be region specific, but as time goes on, more and more major towns and cities have these groups where they have like organized volleyball or soccer, or basketball, football, flag football, etc., etc. And so that is a way that somebody else could claim momentum instead of being so attached to an identity that they've all but lost. The only reason they haven't lost it is because the stories they tell of who they used to be. And by taking your ego aside and looking in the mirror and finding out who you can be right now and what it's going to take to gain that momentum is, I think, far more valuable. And it's a lesson that some people are unwilling to learn. But I think it's something that the juice is worth the squeeze. I think it's something that if you put yourself in a position where you can start stacking up some momentum, the difference it makes in your life will be profoundly more impactful than anything in that identity that you're clutching onto. You won't have to hold on to the glory years. You can create new ones. It's similar to when you watch somebody who might be in their 40s or 50s. They start to take up walking, or they start to take up running. They go up this progression ladder of what it takes to walk faster, run longer, run faster, run without injury, run up elevation, all these different ways that you can do things very gradually, but with almost a guaranteed outcome, where if you are consistent, it will pay off, even if it's not all glamorous. Now, something about all of this in being consistent is that we often feel like we have to stay strong throughout all seasons. So part of this is because we assume that nobody else ever kind of falters or falls down or stumbles or fails. Because when we are meeting other people and interacting with other people, we tend to be kinder to them than they are to themselves. So while they could be brutally honest on every mistake they've ever made in their life and every wrongdoing and every time they used the wrong words or said the wrong thing or showed up at the wrong time, made a wrong turn, did all these things that weren't ideal, we tend to only notice the things that stand out that make us kind of like them. Rarely focused on those things that they're nitpicking about themselves. Especially if we've met them in the right context. If I go to a pickup basketball game and then I notice that somebody's really good at shooting 3-pointers, I'm really not going to be focused on how fast they are going up and down the court because they're constantly able to sink baskets. And it's something that would be amazing to do. So it's something that I notice. And then if I was a better shooter than somebody and that fell to the wayside, I didn't notice it at all, I would probably notice the quick people, the people who are good at ball handling, dribbling, deking people out, making good plays, seeing the play before it happened. We have to keep that in mind when we are thinking about how we have to be perceived the way that we wish. So when you are thinking about staying strong, know that that adds room for giving yourself grace. Know that that gives you the capacity to work at a sustainable pace. And so for me, in going through what I'm experiencing right now, I've learned that staying strong can look way different this year than it would have looked 5 years ago. Staying strong now is actually making more pivots in the behind the scenes, the subtle things that nobody notices, in an effort to sustain future progress. So that means being more mindful about my heart health, checking my blood pressure regularly. It's something that I've been doing for quite a while now, but it's equally important. I'll show you, I have a blood pressure monitor somewhere. So if you're watching on YouTube or anywhere else, Substack, of this blood pressure monitor, I got it for I think $15 online. You can also get them at drugstores usually. And it's just a good way to check yourself in between seasons, where some people would call it maintenance, some people would call it recovery, some people would call it their discovery phase for what the next steps are. But things like that, things like getting enough water, getting enough sleep, moderating caffeine, getting enough fiber, getting enough protein, all of those elements are behind the scenes consistent steps that can allow you to stay strong, but they don't look as glamorous as PRing all of your lifts or being a very competitive athlete. But without those things, the greatness cannot come to be. And that can sound super cliche, but if you leave those things to the wayside, everything that you've worked to achieve can disappear. And that is not fun. My earliest memory of believing that hard work equals worth was probably in the areas that I either saw a path to a reward or I saw an obstacle that I was unwilling to stop at. So the path to a reward, we used to do these challenges. They came up in grade 3. Grade 4 was when we did this the most because I had a teacher, Miss Myers, and she was super cool because she made a challenge, how many books that we read, how many pages, how often throughout the week that we were reading. And if we were to keep track of the number of books that we read, the person who read the most books in the week or the month or whatever period of time that it was, because I can't even remember anymore, whoever read the most would win prizes. And eventually I was just absolutely smoking so many people with this reading challenge that I was given a gift card. It was actually 2 gift cards to Chapters, and I was super excited about this because I was able to go to Chapters with my mom and pick up my own books, and I was really grateful because I understood this came from my teacher's pocket. She was pouring into us, and she just wanted us to love reading, and she wanted us to become the best version of ourselves. But I realized that I was willing to do whatever it took to win in this instance. I was staying up till probably 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning as a little kid, reading books. I loved the books. I loved reading. I didn't want to sleep. But it probably wasn't my best choice because I could have gone to bed earlier and I still would have read the most books. I was ahead of the next person by 20 books or 20 pages or whatever the measurement was. It was a substantial lead on the rest of the class, which I think is why she made such an effort to make a bonus prize, because she could see how much effort and dedication was going into it. And I think I just felt that if I just outworked everybody to the degree that it almost made it unfun for everybody else, that I would be worthy. What I remember is that the only thing that really came out of that was I got a prize, and I don't think anybody else did. And we didn't do the book challenge anymore because it's very clear that I was going to outwork everybody no matter how many times we did that challenge. So I learned something in that sometimes it's not how hard you work, it's the work that you're doing. So that kind of gave me an idea that I realized that I can apply my work ethic to any industry, but it's only meaningful if the work means something to me. So in past industries that I've worked in, I've been able to do all kinds of cool stuff. I've been able to meet performance goals. I've been able to learn new skills. But if it didn't mean anything, it wasn't worth it. And so that's why I kind of went into the career that I did. Because then when I work harder, then there's so much more purpose. And in doing that kind of work, I'm almost more aware of what I need to be at my best. Because to do the work that I do requires very high emotional intelligence, very good communication skills, and just genuinely good health, mentally and physically. And so you kind of put guardrails on yourself to ensure that you're able to stay on track, to ensure that you don't succumb to a major illness or get yourself injured in a way that's irreversible. It kind of makes you check yourself before you wreck yourself. So, next thing is I have a tendency to do things the hard way. And sometimes that's good, but sometimes it's ridiculous. And so when it comes to pushing through at all costs, that's where you can start to have negative outcomes with your heart health, which is why I check my heart health. When I know that I have to go for a walk, I stop what I'm doing. Doesn't matter if there's deadlines, I go for a walk. Sometimes I'll go for a walk in the morning, sometimes I'll go for a walk with a friend, sometimes I'll go for a walk in the evening. Additionally, when I feel myself getting overwhelmed or stressed out, I know that I have to find ways to calm down the atmosphere. Whether that is playing instrumental music in the background or just going for a drive somewhere. These are the things that I know that I need to do so that I don't self-sabotage for myself, so that I can raise my standards, so that I can push the needle, push the envelope, whatever expression you want to use, without wrecking myself, without sabotaging myself. Now, something that I could make easier for myself right now, but I haven't, is probably looking at ways to either enroll more tools into my work or enroll more people into my work. This is something that I'll probably be mulling over for quite some time. When I'm talking about tools for my work, I'm mostly talking about the way that I market. Most of my marketing is organic marketing. I rely on the connections that I made at conferences. I rely on the people who gravitate towards my podcast. I rely on connections I made through different contracting work that I've done for different businesses, either through their podcasts or through their coaching or through video editing, etc., etc. Past jobs, past classes that I've taken, everything like that is basically what's gotten me to where I am. And I've never really heavily leveraged like Facebook ads, Google ads, LinkedIn ads, Reddit ads. And that's something that is very low hanging fruit that I could start doing. I know how to do it. I'm experienced in doing it. I've helped other coaches do it. And I've just been so stubborn to staying to organic marketing. On the other side, there are often opportunities where I could look at like maybe having like an intern or hiring somebody to take on some of my very tedious low effort tasks. But what I've tried to do is kind of bridge that gap with as many AI tools as I can. Because I recognize that my brain works a little bit uniquely. And when it comes to delegating to somebody else, what I've learned from my experience and from watching other people is when you're delegating something out, you can't expect 100% completion. You can't expect 100% perfection, I should say, is more likely the expectation you should set. You can totally expect somebody to do what they said that they would do, but you can't always expect it to be pristine and perfect, because if you do, it'll never get done. And very few people will have the capacity, the bandwidth to continually make the revisions that you would have made yourself. Because if you need somebody else to do it over and over and over in the same way that you had been doing it yourself, where you hadn't gotten where you want to be because your perfectionism was the biggest thing that holds you back, you're not only going to hold yourself back, but you're going to hold them back as well. And you're going to be paying for it. Literally, you're going to be paying to hold somebody else back, in turn holding yourself back. So a real life example of where this comes into play is if you were I'll use this example because I saw it recently. There's a home cleaner that I followed on Instagram for quite a few years, because every time when I saw them featuring a home that they cleaned, it just looked so pristine. They had such crazy, amazing attention to detail. And as their business grew, as it should, they brought on some team members. And I have to say, their team members were more likely than not of a very high standard of detail. I think they probably exceeded the expectations that this person had. But I have a feeling that this person was very critical of themselves, very critical of their work, and that's how they gained their initial clientele and had the thriving business that they did. And there's a very high chance that there's been times when these other highly talented individuals have missed the mark on tiny little details that the business owner had, with expectations of maybe how a bathroom should be cleaned, or maybe expectations of how a blanket should be folded. And they probably had to make accommodations, adjustments to see that there's more than one way to do something well. And they may have even had to notice when their contractor or their employee did something far differently than how they'd ever do it, but the client was still happy, despite the fact that it might have been a certain percentage of completion by their standards. The other thing is just knowing how to assess a good job versus a bad job. So in these instances, having standard procedures, standard operating procedures, it can also just be the game plan, the blueprint, the way things work around here. Just something where it's standardized. So if somebody's missed the mark, you can reference it and you've both studied it or are aware of it to be able to be on the same team and understanding, okay, now what do we do? How can we fix this? For example, house cleaning business, they didn't wipe the baseboards. If it's in their standard operating plan that baseboards must be wiped, they can both refer to it and the people can make it right. They wipe the baseboards, and then that's how they maintain the standard that the expectation is set that they meet. So by aiming for 60 to 80%, just not quite 100%, it doesn't mean depriving somebody of the service that they asked for or compromising on the entire process. It just means that it's nearly impossible to be perfect. And anybody who thinks that they're perfect all the time likely has a blind spot that will catch up to them, or has not put in enough reps where it will take off from where it needs to be. It's very similar to a lot of people will start a podcast, but they want it to be absolutely best pixels, best editing, best this, best that. And I'm like, okay, how many episodes do you have? And they're like, one. And like, but nobody's watching it. I'm like, yeah, because nobody really knows who you are, or if they do, they don't know why you're putting out a podcast. They think you might quit, and you have to prove them wrong through repetition. So why don't you improve the quality as you go, rather than trying to be a one-hit wonder and then build all your momentum off that first perfect episode that of course everybody watched, because yeah, we're all just going to watch the first rep that you've ever done. Where people get tripped up is that they start comparing themselves. They see their first episode and then they're looking at a celebrity who starts their first episode. But what they're missing, and this happens in the business space too, but we'll first talk about podcasts. What they're missing when they're looking at a celebrity's first episode is that all of the celebrity's actions off the podcast counted as reps too. And this is simply transposing all their experience, repetitions, connections, lessons from one style of media into another. Whereas somebody like myself, I think I might have had 2 media appearances before I started my podcast, and then it was just from a nobody to still a nobody, but just less of a nobody. And it's just a perspective shift that people need. So to help with imagining this, picturing this, I'm going to use the business example because this comes up a lot. And I think the best instance of where I recognize this from is with my work that I helped Beverly Simpson with. So Beverly would help coaches, and she could help 2 different coaches. She could help a brand new coach. She could help an experienced coach. And what would often happen is a brand new coach would come to some of her email marketing and see, oh, I can help you get your first blank amount of money But what they were missing was the fact that they were trying to start from a point where they didn't even have a certification. And so they were like, where's my money? And it's like, well, you're not certified yet. That wasn't, you were, the expectation is that you would have the qualifications to deliver a service. And then in delivering that service, maybe the gap for you was the marketing process. Maybe the gap for you was the consistency. But you can't have marketing or consistency if you don't have a service to provide or a business model. And so they would be frustrated because they had to play that catch up thing, and they were comparing themselves to people who had been in the industry for 10 years, and they could apply a few simple strategies to get to where they wanted to be. It could be somebody who had been in the industry for 10 years, had helped countless people in person and a handful of people online. And then if they just reached out to everybody that they've ever helped and said that they were offering a new online program for anybody who'd ever worked with them and it would be 50% off, then they could enroll. By taking little actions like that, that's where you're getting the results. But you're comparing somebody who isn't even qualified with somebody with 10 years experience. We can use the same scenario for a person who's not qualified versus one with 1 year experience, where they're able to capitalize on the fact that they are qualified, and then also with how they have a lot of connections who they maybe passively helped, who know other people who they could help, that they can leverage those and they can get momentum that way. And so that is something where you have to be aware of the expectations that you set yourself for, and you have to be aware of the hidden context that is clear as day, but is easy to forget when we're getting excited about things. When we think about setting the scene when we're telling a story, you can tell a story about a doctor and their dog, but setting the scene is talking about what kind of doctor they are. Are they a medical doctor? Is it maybe a physiotherapist or a chiropractor with a doctorate degree? Is it a doctor of academia? And then what kind of dog is it? When we get into that, it's no longer a doctor walking their dog, but suddenly it becomes something much deeper than that. You understand this person can't have a dog at work, or they can have a dog at work. You start to understand this dog goes on 4 walks a day, it goes on 1 walk a day. And then you're no longer comparing things so statically, and you're starting to see the dynamics of it all, and you start to see where you can weave yourself in and where it doesn't apply to you. You start to see how everybody's lessons can apply to you, but they won't apply to you in the same way it applied to them. And so you start to apply critical thinking, which is bound to be lost on this world. Which brings me to talking about the importance of having critical thinking and understanding the distinction between letting tools and other people guide your path, but then also understanding that you have autonomy in that path. One of the things that I've been doing over the last couple months is writing daily on Substack. When I do that, I use AI as a tool, but AI doesn't write what I put out. What ends up happening is I might utilize AI to interview me on the subject matter that I want to cover, or I'll use AI to restructure what I've written about in a way that is more likely to engage people's attention, but is all context that I've spent the time to infuse. Because without that context, the writing feels dry, empty, soulless. And so when I infuse the context, but then take it upon myself to make sort of like a universal application, meaning that the way I write naturally might be very rambly, run on sentences. The punctuation might not be where it needs to be for it to land with a person who doesn't know me personally. And so that's where AI can take the lead and create space where there needs to be space, and create condensed sentences where something could have been shorter. And it helps to call out the things that need to be called out. It helps to deconstruct the concepts that might have gotten lost on people. And that's where you can infuse different tools. And the same would be true if I was to send something to an editor before I published a book. See, this is where things come up and they become more universal. Because a person could be like, well, we've never used tools like this in the past, but we do. It just looks different. Or they're like, we've never gathered data like we have in the past. And I think my best example was I was doing research for a presentation that I did on AI and SEO a while back, probably a year or two ago. And so I was learning about the origins of AI. And AI has been around far longer than all this buzz about AI. And one of the instances is when we think about the itemization of grocery stores, they itemize each of your items oftentimes into categories of the store, and each of them have a SKU. So it's a product code that pertains to a very specific item, whether it be elbow macaroni or maybe mandarin oranges. Each of them has something that pertains to them so that when you scan it, it's recognized and it helps them maintain their inventory and it helps them to see trends. And in doing that, they're creating their own sense of algorithm. And by analyzing this, it helps them to make their next orders, to see trends, to see sales. And the art of organizing this data in such a way, part of that is artificial intelligence. Because if you're using any kind of algorithm or mathematical equation or formula to help you gather this data, you are no longer having a human recite all these things one by one by one by one, writing it down on paper. You're using technology to give you the intelligence that might have otherwise come from the guy who peddles the oranges, says he's run out of oranges on a Thursday and he usually lasts till Sunday, and now he needs to get more oranges for next season as long as it's a sunny week, for example. People will set trends, they'll set purchases for things like retail in advance. If you're working in clothing, footwear, you often have to have buyers for that company that make a forecast for what stores will need, what allocations each store will need. For example, they'll buy a set amount of a certain soccer cleat. I used to work at Sport Check, so that's why we're using that example. They'll buy a certain soccer cleat, and this will be for the whole country's worth of stores. They'll have it at their warehouse, but now they're making allocations for which stores get which quantities. And they also have to make allocations for special orders if somebody's submitting a team order, anything like that. If it's over and above, then they need to have some kind of clear commitment to that purchase, because it's going to require a higher cost to purchase more additional units than it would if they were working with the units that they currently had. There's a lot of moving parts, and they have to give themselves a bit of a runway for those purchases that they're making. But in doing that, the more data that they have, the more accurate they can be. And in that process is AI. And so when we think about it that way, we are no longer trying to just simply replace ourselves with mindless tasks. We are being more intentional into how we apply technology. And oftentimes what I do with, maybe it's like a client who works with me on their fitness and nutrition, if I can tell that there's a time that they just simply need to look inward, they can use AI as a tool to help them interview themselves, to help them get an unbiased point of view of what they're kind of working through, what they're dealing with, maybe some acknowledgement as to how they feel, but knowing that they still have to use critical thinking as to their next steps. Because even some unbiased views on our life aren't making decisions that align with kind of where we want to be. I could say that I'm struggling with A, B, and C, and it might suggest something that's a solution, but it might not be my solution. Very similar to in times when it was not quite so clear as to what my career path was going to be. Some people would nudge me to go for a more clear career path that they're more familiar with, and other people would just step back and kind of let me find my way. For me to find my way is probably more fulfilling than if I take everybody's advice. And I think this is going to be important for a lot of people to learn, because we're always going to have people with their opinions, their advice, and we can love them and support them and respect them. But the person who knows the best path would be us. And that's something to really latch onto, something to understand, something that will help you in the future. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is I tend to be a very loyal person. And there's times when I probably stay loyal for longer than necessary. But I'm going to put as much context into this as to why it made sense and what I had to do and what I choose to do when I'm moving on from a loyal path. I always felt loyal to my former career. I There's a lot of things that I still remember quite fondly, like the skills that I learned, the work ethic that got refined. But I knew that I was becoming further and further from myself, from who I wanted to be in life. And so I needed to step away. And the only way to step away was to pull off the Band-Aid. But then it happened again, where I was chasing the career that I was more fulfilled in, and I was collecting different roles, different identities to what my career was. But I started to notice that there was moments where I was holding myself back based on what I was accepting, what I was going for, etc. So in this context, it's within the work that I've done in media, where sometimes I've contracted for other people and I've put my best foot forward and I've done a lot of work. But I started to realize that I was doing everything that I could possibly do to progress. But the only way to progress further was to be more independent. And so, to be clear, when I've done things like this, it's very rarely because of like the connection that I have with the person that I'm providing the service to. It's usually I have a really strong connection. That's why I'm so loyal. But what ends up happening is that I start to basically look at the data. Instead of making emotional decisions, I start to look at the data and understand like the longer that I do this, the less time I'm going to have with like my siblings, my parents, my nieces, and everybody else that I care and love. So when you're starting to look at it that way, then it's a lot easier to be like, okay, I'm starting to notice that I've gained a ton of experience with this opportunity. I've updated a lot of my equipment, a lot of my resources, made a lot of good connections. And now if I go out on my own, I'll be able to work half as much and make the same amount because I'll be independent and there's a lot of risk to it, but it's something that I'm experienced enough to handle. And this is something that a lot of people might find themselves needing to do. And it's not easy and it doesn't come without friction, but it's an essential thing in getting to where you need to be, specifically career-wise, but you may find it comes up in your personal life too. And so how I balance being loyal and honest with myself is just being very good at communicating where I want to go in life and how I'm going to get there. Because when people see that I have clear conviction in this path, it makes it easier for them to accept that I have a plan, and it's not that I don't appreciate what I've gotten from them. It's more so that I acknowledge what I've got from them and that I know that it's set me up to make my next step, but I also know that I had some security in helping them, but I'm going to be taking on more risk in my next move. And now it's me. It's all on me. They have no responsibility in making sure that I'm successful. They simply get to sit back and watch. And what I tend to do in these situations where I'm moving on from somebody that I've been helping is I try to keep the bridge as healthy as possible. I don't burn bridges. The only instances where I might would be if somebody had burned the bridge first and I was like, okay, let's just make this a clean break. Let's not work with this person in any capacity ever again, because if trust is betrayed or if there are deep flaws in character where it seems like these people might cause harm, then it's not worth taking a chance on again. There's just some things you just can't come back from. Now, a moment where loyalty tested my character and not my patience was when I've noticed when people will say one thing and do something else. And so I like to observe like how people do things almost when you're not watching, although ironically I would be watching because that's what I'm doing. but just like the little hidden things that people do. Like if there's somebody that needs help, is that person going to be one of the people that help them? Or if there is something that has nothing to do with them, but it's an opportunity for somebody else, do they make that connection? Even just subtle things like acknowledging certain events that pertain to other people's culture or social group, etc. Just where I can see that they can see that the world is bigger than just them. Those are some of the things where I start to think, okay, this person is somebody that I want to have in my world. Now, the ways that I practice loyalty towards myself without feeling selfish is probably going to go back to keeping an eye on things like blood pressure, keeping an eye on things like daily activity, keeping an eye on things like my nutrition, making sure that I'm not compromising my nutrition by taking the shortcut, taking the easy road. And sometimes life forces you to do that. So right now with my health things that I'm investigating, my nutrition is very strict. Similarly strict to what it was when I was trying to instruct at different spin studios that were a bit more competitive. I would basically only eat lean meat, lots and lots of vegetables, and basically no indulgences, like no cookies, no ice cream, no beer, nothing like that. So I've been alcohol free for multiple years now, so that's off the table. But I've also been making a point to, if not completely eliminate, greatly reduce things like ice cream, cookies, certain high processed carbs. Most of my carbohydrates right now are usually fruits and vegetables and whole grains. So things like oatmeal, or I've even cut back on bread. Having sandwiches, but they would be a 9 grain or sprouted grain or whole grain or something with a lot of nutrients to it where there was still a lot of diverse nutrition. But just now, out of an abundance of caution, I'm reducing the highly processed or just processed carbs and trying to simply stick to as much whole food as I can because it tends to agree with my body a bit more. Also reducing sources of fat. So if I have the choice between lean chicken and high fat chicken, I have to choose lean chicken or else I end up paying for it. I get super bloated. And these are the things that I have to do in order to be loyal to myself, to start writing my comeback story. Because in doing that, it ensures that the testing that I'll take will be much more smooth. There'll hopefully be less obstructions, and it writes a story for what I can do for myself in the time to come. If my nutrition is dialed in, if my activity is consistent, even if it's mostly walking and some light strength training, it sets me up with so much more opportunities in the future. And the same can be said if you are starting your fitness journey and you're like, oh, walking doesn't count, or 15 squats a day or 40 push-ups a day, it doesn't count. If you do all those things consistently, you will have a profound impact in the outcomes of your life going forward, especially if you maintain that for decades. If you listen to this episode and you're not doing squats and push-ups and walking, if you listen to this episode and from now on out, you decide that every morning when you wake up, you're going to do 30 squats and 40 push-ups, even if it takes you a whole day to get all those reps done. Maybe you're doing sets of 10 or something. And then on top of that, you get 7,500 to 10,000 steps, or maybe you push yourself, you get 12,000 steps a day. Even if you have to separate that into 4 intervals throughout the day, 4 little mini walks, if you maintain that in today's society, you will be so far ahead of so many other people, and you'll feel like that was so small that it wasn't worth doing. And that's the biggest lesson for you to learn, is to realize how small things done consistently pay off so big. And you don't always have to do the dramatic, amazing, look at me go, I lifted 400 pounds, or I did a faster marathon or something. Sometimes it's the tiny actions that you do that result in a big transformation, a big win, a progress achieved. So when we're talking about versions of ourselves and we're reflecting our growth, something worth noting is being able to reflect on a version of ourselves that we've outgrown. And I have to say, Facebook is a great
way of learning about who you used to be through seeing your old statuses. And I have no doubt matured dramatically as a person since high school. That said, I was a relatively mature high school student. I didn't party. I generally tried to stay out of trouble, with the exception of one time I did a burnout out of the parking lot. And it was familiar enough that my mom made a joke about it. We drove past my old high school on a little trip we did out to a few lakes, and she was like, "Now don't do a burnout." I was like, "No, that's not the plan. Just looking for some nostalgia." I drove through the parking lot, and I have nothing but positive feelings for so many teachers and classmates. But I was like, wow, it didn't that kind of warm, fuzzy feeling. I do have warm, fuzzy feelings for lots of teachers and classmates, but I wanted to see what it felt like to be closer to an old version of me. But I had changed so much since then that it's irrelevant now. Back then, I thought that I had to do something different in order to be fulfilled and successful, and now I've completely thrown that upside down and reinvented the wheel, at least in my own little bubble. There's nobody else in my family that does what I do. Nobody else has gotten this much progress self employed, and nobody else is so stubborn to just keep doing what people all over the place are saying is unrealistic, impossible. And it's not that it just comes easily, or it's not that I'm the best at doing it. It's just simply that I find the ways to be consistent in order to get those outcomes that I'm looking for, whether it be being able to help more people across North America with their fitness and nutrition, or whether it be helping podcasts reach new heights or helping people start their podcast. There's just so much stuff in what I do that wouldn't be possible if I had stayed attached to that version of me from the past. And I did still feel attached to them because I was looking for that nostalgia, but now I realize there's really no attachment. It's just simply a version of me that ceases to exist, that can be remembered fondly, much like my former teachers and classmates, but that I don't need to visit all the time, that I don't need to circle back to all the time and think about, oh, better be like that version, because that version no longer serves me. And you may find that you will find yourself in similar times, and it can be a great thing. And just know that if you used to be terrible at something and then you've worked at it, and now you're good at it, you no longer have to identify yourself as terrible at a thing, because you've improved and you've gotten better. And now you're probably in a position where you can probably get somebody else started on that same journey. And even if you're not the expert, even if you're not the most experienced in that progression, the best comparison that I can make is the belt system in Jiujitsu. A blue belt can help a white belt. A blue belt at times can help a purple belt, depending on their background, depending on their thought process. You don't have to be a black belt to help everybody on the mats. You can be a white belt and teach people lessons in how you react, how you apply things you've learned off the mats onto the mats. When wrestlers go into jiu-jitsu, when judo practitioners go into jiu-jitsu, when former professional athletes go into jiu-jitsu, there's a lot of different skills, whether it be breathing technique, whether it be confidence, whether it be just muscle connection, strength, etc. Everybody can learn something from everybody, and we need to get away from the thought that you have to be at the top in order to be a teacher. As long as you have integrity and character and you know what you're capable of and you don't pretend to be somebody beyond your level just to impress people. Because if you pretend to be somebody beyond your level and you're teaching things you've never done yourself, it can get a little bit tricky. For me, I have strength trained a lot. I have produced a lot of podcasts. I have done extensive creative cooking for myself to get my macros on track. I've gone through the required different education and certifications. I feel very comfortable imparting my knowledge to other people, even though I learn from people with 20 to 30 to 40 years experience in the same fields. But when I am always holding myself to the standard of being a continual lifelong learner, then I feel completely at peace with bridging the gap for other people in all the aspects of the work that I do. Now, sometimes we mistake grinding for growing. And this is where I often find myself reaching crossroads at this point in my career. When I identify that I'm just putting in work, tracking hours, but nothing else is changing, that's when I'm grinding and not growing. Anybody can put in the hours and make your paycheck, put in the hours and quote people. But if you don't notice some visible progression within where you are versus where you want to be, that's when you need to make a self audit of yourself and figure out what you need to achieve to get to where you want to go. Whether it is more skill acquisition, whether it is a better management of your time. Maybe there's a way that you can allocate your time that is more beneficial to your long-term goal. Maybe it is just a logistical thing where in order to make something possible, you need to make changes with something else. Now, we're going to segue into nutrition and health and listening to the body. I know we've touched on these topics a little bit, but I want to talk on for myself when I started to hear my body sort of whispering, hey, pay attention. It's kind of wild because for the longest time I was like, okay, I'm pretty sure at some point I cracked a rib or something because I had some piercing pain on the side here. And it could have been, I could have cracked a rib. Maybe that's all it was, because keep in mind at the time I'm recording this episode, I'm still waiting on some health results. But when I really started to notice it was when I would notice myself getting a bit more lightheaded. And then also I would notice I would eat certain food and my body would just react like crazy. There's I think it's a Korean place. It's called Kinjo. And they have sushi. They have dark meat chicken. So they have spicy chicken, regular chicken, spicy chicken sandwiches, regular chicken sandwiches. And it's all delicious. And it's priced so well. But what I didn't factor in is how different food compositions at this point with the symptoms that I've been showing could cause an unexpected reaction for me. So what ended up happening is I had a few of these sandwiches because they were so delicious. But the meat wasn't lean, so it was actually pretty high fat. It had a lot of extra elements to it that I didn't factor in for because I was just so used to having bland food. And if I were to indulge in something, it was just like a burger or something. But this stuff just set off my gut and I just felt super bloated and I felt like my guts were going to come up through my throat. And I was like, oh man, something is not good. And so already I knew that I needed to refine my nutrition. And then when I saw the doctor, he was like, okay, you're probably going to want to reduce or eliminate your processed starchy carbs and sources of high fat. And so I started to look at the nutrition profile of a lot of different meals and reassess things. Things like chicken with the skin on, now I have to take the skin off, at least for the time being. Things like whole milk ice cream, very creamy food, I have to take a step back and look for substitutions, look for things like maybe frozen yogurt, things that are just a little bit more gentle on my stomach. And I realized these things don't come up when we plan them. We don't just book, okay, at this time I want to go through this thing and this is how I'm going to deal with it. It doesn't work that way. It just goes boom. And you're like, okay, I guess I'm going to deal with this now. And it doesn't wait turns for you to be done managing somebody else's thing that you're helping them with or for it to be convenient or anything like that. You just have to take the challenge head on and do what needs to be done. So for me, it was a matter of finding a doctor who could take me in. They did. That was good. New clinic opened north of me. That was very lucky. And then finding the time to go in and get assessed. And then now it's finding the time to go in for these various tests that need to happen. And then having the follow through to ensure that if I don't hear from the doctor, I set a follow-up appointment. And it was just so unexpected because before I refused to listen when I had pain that was so severe that I was taking 3 Advil a day. or Tylenol, whatever was on sale, and it wasn't in excess. I followed the directions. If it said one every 8 hours, I took one every 8 hours. If it said one every 6 hours, I took one every 6 hours. If it said do not use beyond 2 days, I didn't use beyond 2 days. Because all that stuff can be very damaging if used in excess. So I just want to be clear. I played by the rules. I was very conscious of what can happen when you're using painkillers. But it was just kind of something that I thought maybe I just injured myself in jiu-jitsu. Maybe it's just some crazy move. But to be honest, it could have been so many things. I'm hoping to maybe uncover or discover what those things were. So something with my recent health check-ins, something that it's taught me to control is just cooking more for myself and assessing the situation, figuring out how I can make it a simple solution. So if I'm dishing up a plate at a family dinner, a simple solution is making the biggest servings the vegetables, and then looking for the leanest sources of protein to add on top to get as close to my protein goal as possible. So maybe not loading up on all of the servings that I would normally have, but just getting the minimum viable amount, especially if it's shake and bake chicken with the skin on, because that's something that I had this past weekend that I was like, oh man, I really paid for that. But the thing that I did was I only had 2 pieces of chicken when me from 2 months ago would have totally had 3. I love shake and bake chicken. It's one of my weaknesses. The other thing is looking at things like cookies. I love cookies, but when you're trying to reduce fat, you have to reduce cookies in most instances. But what I sometimes forget is the number of times I've made cookies for myself and I was maybe cutting for jiu-jitsu, and the cookie that I made was so bland and so unconventional, but it hit the spot for me. And it was made with straight oatmeal, eggs, maybe some bran. It was the most unorthodox cookie, but because it was baked and round and I could chew it, I was like, yep, that'll do. Adding in some honey causes no harm. These little things that you can do to make something work. That's the biggest thing. One of the other shifts that I made is I'm typically a big fan of whole eggs. And I debate this a lot with a lot of different people. My mom is like, eat the whole egg. You need the nutrition. I'm like, yes, but right now we're trying to be mindful of our fat intake, and the yolk is going to have some fat. Although it is healthy, it's just my body isn't processing fat the way it's supposed to. And so if I reduce it, I can still get my protein. So it's kind of one of those things where if the world was perfect, you'd eat it the way that you normally would. But now that you're in a circumstance where you have to be more mindful, you're doing it differently, regardless of what anybody else thinks, because you are in charge of your own destiny. That's kind of something that I've learned about how I have to take control. It's something that I've learned about how sometimes we feel fine, but we aren't fine. We just feel fine because we're like, this is good enough. This will have to do because I have things to do. I have commitments to follow through with, but we're not operating at 100%. And I've definitely been operating at about 70 to 80% physically for the last year. There'd be times I'd lift something up and I'd feel something at my side. Or there'd be times when I'd be running in a field with some friends playing frisbee or something, and I'd be like, whoa, I'm really feeling this in a way that I've never felt anything, like maybe elevated heart rate or trouble breathing, all these different things that come with the bloating. It's just, it shapes you. It teaches you things. It makes you look at things differently. It gives you so many more tools to coach people. It gives you so much more insight into how you work, how you can be resilient, and how you can be foolish. And it's important. Now, being in fitness does make it harder to admit when I'm not 100%. Prepping for this episode, I felt like I was like, what am I doing? But I asked my friends to do solo episodes for their podcast when they were looking for something. They wanted to do something polished. They wanted to do something perfect. And I suggested do something imperfect and put your best foot forward. And they did it. And when I think about how this season of my life has made me rethink what healthy really means beyond numbers and metrics, I've realized how much it involves and incorporates everything we do. it involves and incorporates that sometimes we are not pursuing our utmost strength, but we are keeping our organs as healthy as we possibly can. And the biggest challenge starts to become saying no to so many of our favorite things. I have said no to carbonated beverages. I love those. I usually get a Coke Zero or a Zevia or a bubbly or just sparkling water, but it doesn't help with the whole bloating situation. So I have to take a step back from those. I have to take a step back from ice cream, from your conventional cookies like Oreos and stuff, donuts. I love donuts, but they're not the thing for me right now. But in doing that, it sets me up so that if I was to get diagnosed with something, the likelihood of me having a fast recovery is much more high, especially since my hope is that with this strict nutrition that I'm following, that I'll make it easier to diagnose me because there'll be less inflammation kind of blocking some of the imagery, stuff like that. Really, I didn't want what I'm experiencing to be the focal point. I want what I'm experiencing to be able to impart lessons for other people. So, something that I wish more people understood about the cost of always doing things right is that you miss out on the lessons that come with not always getting it right. When you're always trying to be perfect, you're going to limit the experience that you have. And so if you're thinking that you're going to try something new, but you're only going to do it if you can do it perfect, you've already admitted to yourself that you're never going to do it. Because a lot of people who talk about doing something, and I wait and I wait and I wait and I wait and I check on them, and I'm like, okay, when are you going to do the thing? And they're like, oh, I'm going to hold off. I'm not quite ready yet. I'm like, okay, but you're not going to do it. Like, we're all going to be 10 years older and it's not going to happen. And that is important. That is something that I wish people understood. I wish people understood that no matter what you do, it's probably not going to work out the way that you planned, but it's a simple act of not quitting that'll help you. And something that I'm still learning to release, the weight that isn't a barbell, that isn't a trap bar, is probably the standard that I set on myself where I think that I have to do everything by myself. Shout out to my girlfriend because she has similar things where this comes up. She had to get a shout out. I couldn't go the whole episode without. And so what that means is learning that it truly takes teamwork. It takes teamwork in the workplace. It takes teamwork in our family. It takes teamwork in our relationships. It takes teamwork in our friend groups. If you want to go camping, there's no sense in one person packing everything, the food, the equipment, the tents, and driving, because part of the journey of camping is in the preparation or in just each person having their role. Maybe you pack all the equipment, all the gear, and you drive, but then maybe somebody else helps set it up. Another person cooks. Another person does the dishes every time. They take the Tupperware bin and they grab the water and they rinse things off and they drain the water. When it becomes a collaborative effort, it has more meaning for everybody. And in knowing that and in experiencing that, it starts to teach you that a lot of situations in life will inherently feel like anti-collaboration, anti-teamwork. And it's up to us to look for the opportunities to infuse some collaboration and teamwork, but to also understand that collaboration and teamwork won't come up in every connection that we experience, but that we have the ability to seek out the right people for this. Because when we do, that's when we accelerate our progress, whether it be in somebody finding a coach or in a team of people building a house together, or even in the right teammates playing on the same line on a hockey team. Lastly, I want to give a shout out to McDavid, who has signed on for another, I think, 2 years with the Oilers. That's enough for me, just enough to get in that Stanley Cup final again and do McDavid things. But with that, ending on a light note, I know this has been a long episode. I really appreciate if you've been listening this far. going to get back to guest episodes soon. I'm just waiting for life to settle down and to get my ducks in a row. But I didn't want to leave you hanging without an episode for so long. So I hope you enjoyed this one. And if you did, definitely share it with a friend, rate 5 stars, Spotify, subscribe on YouTube, leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Whatever you're able to do to support it doesn't go unappreciated. If you want to check out things like this hat, I have a merch store. It's store.invigoratetraining.com. And if you want to check out my podcast course, I have that available as well. Go to christianliddle.com. You'll find a lot of my different offerings for media. And if you want anything regarding training, check that out at invigoratetraining.com. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.